Have you ever stepped onto a train that didn't exist on any schedule and wished you never had? Tonight, I'll tell you about a young woman, exhausted from work, who made that mistake. What happened to her next, you'll only discover as the story unfolds. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe for more chilling stories like this. Now, let's begin. It was well past midnight when Emma, a young nurse drained from her late shift at the hospital, hurried down into the underground station. Her steps echoed against the damp tiles, each one sounding louder in the empty silence. The air was heavy with the smell of rust and mildew, and a faint chill clung to the tunnels like an invisible fog. The station itself looked abandoned. One flickering fluorescent light buzzed weakly overhead, casting broken shadows that danced across the cracked walls. Somewhere in the distance, a single drop of water fell in rhythm, echoing endlessly like a slow, persistent clock. Emma tightened her grip on her bag, suddenly aware of how alone she was. And then, without warning, a train slid into the platform. No screeching brakes. No sound of engines. Just a smooth, silent arrival, as if it had been gliding through the darkness for centuries. Emma froze. The train was unlike anything she had seen before. Its metal exterior was old and rusted, scarred with deep scratches as though time itself had tried to erase it. The windows were fogged so thick that she couldn't see a single face inside, only the faint suggestion of movement, as if shadows were waiting within. Her brow furrowed. Emma knew the schedule by heart. She had taken this same route every night for years, and no train was supposed to arrive at this hour. This one didn't belong. But the storm outside raged harder now, rain hammering the streets above with relentless force. The idea of waiting alone in the cold, empty station felt worse than the strange unease curling in her stomach. Hesitantly, she stepped forward. The doors opened with a metallic sigh, releasing a stale breath of air that smelled faintly of smoke and something older, something forgotten. With no other choice, Emma crossed the threshold, and the doors sealed shut behind her. Inside, the carriage smelled of damp iron and mildew, as if the air itself had been trapped for decades with no breath of life. The seats were torn in places, the fabric stained with dark patches Emma didn't want to look at too closely. A weak yellow light flickered overhead, casting the faces of the passengers into strange, jerking shadows. They sat in stiff, unnatural rows, men, women, even what looked like a child, but all of them stared forward with the same lifeless expression. Their eyes were wide and unblinking, glassy like dolls propped upright. No one shifted. No one coughed. No one breathed too loudly. The silence pressed in so tightly that Emma could hear the creak of the train's wheels with every turn, as though the old machine itself was groaning under some invisible weight. Her stomach tightened. She clutched her bag like a shield and sank into a seat near the aisle, forcing herself to keep calm. Just one ride, she told herself. Just get through this, and you'll be home. But when her gaze swept over the passengers again, her chest constricted, because none of them, not a single one, had blinked since she stepped aboard. The train surged forward, plunging into the darkness of the tunnel. Time stretched and bent in the silence, until finally, with a long metallic shudder, the carriage slowed. Emma exhaled, certain she had reached her stop. But when she peered through the fogged glass, her heart sank. Outside was nothing but ruin. A platform half swallowed by shadows, its walls cracked and crumbling, broken signs hanging at angles like skeletal remains of a station long abandoned. No lamps. No people. No trace of life. The doors hissed open anyway. None of the passengers moved, their empty stares locked forward. Emma's pulse thudded in her ears. And then, she saw them. Shapes, darker than the shadows themselves, crawling along the broken walls. Their forms dragged as though their limbs were too heavy to carry, inching closer to the open doors. Emma's breath caught in her throat. Then, slam. The doors snapped shut, and the train lurched forward again with a violence that nearly threw her from her seat. Her hands shook as she pulled out her phone, desperate for comfort, but the screen glitched and sputtered. No signal. No Wi-Fi. Just the clock, flickering unnaturally between 12:01 and 3:33, back and forth, over and over, as though time itself was broken. She looked up and froze. Across the aisle, a man had finally moved. Slowly, with a stiffness that seemed wrong, he turned his head toward her. His skin was a sickly, pale gray, stretched too tightly across his bones. His eyes were dark, hollow pits that reflected no light. And then, his mouth opened into a smile. Too wide. Too sharp. Too many teeth gleaming wetly beneath the flickering light. Emma's heart pounded against her ribs. She shot to her feet, voice trembling. Where does this train go? For a moment, the man simply stared. Then, with that monstrous grin stretching wider, he answered in a voice that was more echo than sound, to the last stop. The train screeched with an ear-splitting metallic howl as it barreled into another forgotten station. Sparks sprayed against the tunnel walls like dying stars. Then, with a hiss that rattled the windows, the doors flew open wide. A rush of icy wind blasted into the carriage, carrying with it the stench of earth, rust, and something older, something rotten. Emma's breath clouded instantly, white vapor spilling from her lips. Her skin prickled with gooseflesh. This time, the passengers moved. In one jerking, unified motion, they rose from their seats, stiff as mannequins. Their necks cracked as they turned toward her, faces pale and hollow, eyes black as coal, endless pits swallowing what little light flickered above. Their movements were slow, deliberate, almost ritualistic, as though they had been waiting for this moment all along. Emma stumbled backward, pressing against the sealed door. Her heart slammed against her ribs so violently it hurt. One by one, the figures began to step forward. Their footsteps echoed unnaturally, hollow, heavy, each sound reverberating through the metal carriage like the tolling of a funeral bell. No, no, stay back. Emma's voice broke into a whisper, strangled by fear. Desperate, she lunged for the emergency brake. She yanked it with all her strength, nothing. The lever stayed locked in place, unyielding, as though mocking her. Panic surged through her veins. She grabbed her bag and swung it against the nearest window. The glass didn't even crack. It wasn't glass at all, it was something solid, something unbreakable, like a barrier keeping her trapped. The train groaned as it sped up, vibrating beneath her feet. The sound was no longer mechanical, it was alive, like some monstrous heartbeat rising from the steel bones of the carriage. Emma's eyes darted across the aisle, searching for escape, and then she froze. At the far end of the carriage, a figure had appeared. A tall man in a conductor's uniform, standing utterly still. His cap cast his face in shadow, but in his gloved hand he held a lantern. The flame inside it burned an unnatural shade of green, sickly and luminous, bathing the carriage in a ghostly light that made the passengers' faces look even more inhuman. Slowly, with an almost deliberate calmness, the conductor raised his arm and pointed directly at her. His voice rolled down the length of the train like a low, vibrating thunder. You shouldn't be here. Emma's knees nearly buckled. She opened her mouth to scream, but before a sound could escape, the passengers lunged as one. Dozens of cold, claw-like hands seized her arms, her shoulders, her throat. Their touch burned with freezing numbness, pulling her downward into the dark, their faces so close now, grins tearing too wide, eyes empty voids. She thrashed and clawed, but their strength was inhuman, unrelenting. The train roared louder, faster, its walls trembling as though it were carrying her straight into some endless abyss. And then, the lantern's green flame flared, and Emma's world went black. When Emma opened her eyes, the world was silent. She was sprawled on the hard ground of a platform, her body aching, her breath shallow. The air was damp and bitterly cold, seeping into her bones. Slowly, she pushed herself upright, her palms scraping against cracked concrete. The train was gone. The tracks stretched into the blackness of the tunnel like veins leading nowhere. The silence around her was heavy, unnatural, so complete that she could hear the faint thud of her own heartbeat in her ears. Emma's phone buzzed weakly in her trembling hand. She switched on the flashlight, the pale beam slicing through the dust and shadows. That's when she noticed it. On the crumbling wall beside her hung an old, decayed timetable, its paper yellowed, edges curling as if it had been untouched for decades. Most of the ink had faded into illegibility, but Emma stepped closer, lifting the light. Her chest tightened. There it was, at the very bottom, a final line barely visible under layers of grime. Midnight train, passengers never return. Her throat went dry. The words seemed to breathe with the wall, pulsing faintly as if they weren't written but carved into the very bones of the station. The silence pressed heavier now. Emma spun the light across the platform. Ruined benches, broken tiles, rust streaks running down the walls like dried blood. Everything looked abandoned for decades, forgotten by time itself. Yet, she could feel it. She wasn't alone. The air shifted, colder. From deep inside the tunnel's throat came a sound. Distant, but unmistakable. The faint, metallic groan of steel against steel. The slow, crawling screech of wheels turning far below the earth. Her stomach dropped. It was coming back. Emma staggered to her feet, her legs barely holding her. She turned toward the stairway at the far end of the platform, but the steps were gone, crumbled into rubble, nothing but jagged stone leading up to darkness. There was no way out. The sound grew louder. The tunnel shook with each metallic scream, dust raining down from the ceiling. A light flickered deep in the black void ahead, not white, not warm, but that same sickly green flame she had seen before. Emma's breath hitched. She backed away until her shoulders pressed against the cold wall. Her phone flickered in her hand, the light stuttering, dying. The screech of wheels was deafening now, echoing like the roar of some enormous beast clawing its way back to claim her. And as the glow of the lantern swelled in the tunnel, Emma realized the timetable had been right all along. The midnight train was never meant to let her go. So, what do you think? Was Emma trapped inside a ghost train, or did she accidentally step into another world where no passenger ever returns? Tell us your opinions in the comments. We'd love to know. And remember, if a train ever arrives that isn't on the schedule, don't step on. If you enjoyed this chilling tale, make sure to subscribe to Mr.NightBox for more terrifying stories, and don't forget to like and share this video with someone who loves scary tales. And yes, wait for next chilling story.